In the autumn of 1985, a horrifying tragedy struck, shaking the global aviation industry and plunging the entire nation of Japan into unspeakable grief. Japan Airlines Flight JAL 123, departing from Tokyo to Osaka, was lost forever, carrying with it unfinished stories and tears that would never dry. Aboard that plane, a man hurriedly wrote his final letter to his beloved wife and children, knowing that after this moment, he would never have the chance to see them again. The accident would go down as the second worst aviation disaster in history, leaving behind a haunting question: what truly happened on that fateful flight? At 6 p.m. on August 12, 1985, less than an hour before the tragedy unfolded, JAL 123 was preparing to take off from Haneda Airport in Tokyo. The atmosphere was bustling and crowded, as just a few days later, on August 15th, the Obon Festival, the largest Buddhist holiday in Japan, would take place in Osaka. To meet the surge in travel demand, Japan Airlines had mobilized both long-haul flights and short domestic routes, like JAL 123. The Boeing 747 operating this flight, dubbed the Queen of the Skies, had been the world's largest capacity aircraft for 37 years until the Airbus A380 was introduced. On board were 15 crew members and 509 passengers, mostly Japanese, along with a few from Hong Kong, Italy, and the United States. Leading the flight was Captain Takahama, 49 years old, alongside First Officer Sasaki Yukata, 39, an engineer, and 12 flight attendants. Among the passengers was the renowned singer Sakamoto Q, whose song Sukiyaki had once captivated countless listeners. They all carried plans, returning to their hometowns, attending the festival, or simply enjoying a short trip. At 6:12 p.m., JAL 123 took off from runway 16L at Haneda, with First Officer Sasaki Yukata at the controls. The journey was expected to cover just 400 kilometers and last about 60 minutes, a seemingly simple and routine flight. But fate had other plans. Just 12 minutes after takeoff, at 6:24 p.m., as the plane stabilized at an altitude of 7,200 meters, a deafening explosion suddenly erupted from the tail. Emergency alarms blared relentlessly, and the passenger cabin descended into chaos. Terrified passengers screamed, some struggling to breathe. Flight attendants rushed to calm them, instructing everyone to put on oxygen masks and fasten their seatbelts. The chief flight attendant immediately reported the explosion, and an issue at door R5 to the captain. Captain Takahama swiftly ordered passengers to remain seated and prohibited use of the restrooms while checking the control panel. Strangely, no abnormalities appeared on the instruments. However, the real danger was already lurking. Engineer Fugata discovered that the hydraulic system, the lifeblood of the aircraft, was experiencing a severe malfunction. If not addressed immediately, the entire control system would become paralyzed, leaving the crew powerless. In this life-or-death moment, the engineer proposed to Air Traffic Control, ATC, an emergency landing at Haneda. There was an explosion at the tail. The hydraulic system is critically compromised. We're losing control. The desperate plea went out. ATC immediately authorized JAL 123 to turn back, instructing the plane to descend to a safer altitude. On the ground, experts scrambled to investigate the cause of the issue in the Boeing 747's tail. First Officer Sasaki struggled to maneuver the plane back toward Tokyo, but all efforts proved futile as both the autopilot and manual controls completely failed. JAL 123 began to spiral into chaos, pitching up and down in a dangerous cycle known as a phugoid. Its speed surged as it plummeted, generating lift, only to stall as it climbed again, repeating the pattern relentlessly. Instead of making a 90-degree turn back to Haneda, the plane veered off course, plunging deeper into central Japan's coastal region. The first officer reported to ATC, "We can't return to Tokyo. JAL 123 is out of control." They requested an emergency landing at Nagoya Airport, 128 kilometers away. Air traffic control rushed to prepare the runway, but the situation grew increasingly hopeless. Cabin pressure dropped drastically, forcing the crew and passengers to fight to maintain their breathing. First Officer Sasaki exerted every ounce of strength to stabilize the plane and head toward Nagoya. As the aircraft dove, he pushed the throttle, boosting engine thrust to climb, clinging to the hope of regaining some control. In that moment, he still believed a safe landing was possible. But the tragedy was far from over. The oxygen system suddenly failed, rendering the masks useless. Aboard the Boeing 747, life now hung by the thinnest of threads. The cabin pressure had reached a critical threshold, and the oxygen masks were no longer effective. Flight attendants frantically distributed portable oxygen tanks, darting between rows to assist passengers who were slowly suffocating. Captain Takahama, with his wealth of experience, immediately suggested an emergency landing before the entire crew and passengers lost consciousness. But Nagoya was now out of reach. The crew quickly instructed the flight attendants to prepare passengers for impact. Recognizing the dire situation, ATC directed JAL 123 to divert to the nearby U.S. military base at Yokota. Yet even that faint glimmer of hope faded. By 6:55 p.m., the Boeing 747 had spiraled completely out of control, free-falling in despair. First Officer Sasaki pulled the yoke with all his might, desperately trying to lift the nose of the plane, but it was no use. The Queen of the Skies hurtled downward at a terrifying rate, 5,500 meters per minute. "It's over, it's really over." Captain Takahama's helpless final words rang out, a farewell to the unavoidable tragedy. The fate of JL 123 was sealed. In the passenger cabin, cries, prayers, and screams merged into a cacophony. A few couples, including some elderly passengers, held hands tightly with an eerie calm. They had accepted the inevitable. Others hurriedly scribbled final messages on scraps of paper, entrusting faint hopes to loved ones and the world they were about to leave behind. At 6:56 p.m., JL 123 slammed into the peak of Mount Osaka in Gunma Prefecture, 100 kilometers from Tokyo. The plane vanished from radar screens, leaving behind a chilling silence. Shortly after, a U.S. military aircraft spotted the wreckage and immediately launched a search effort. However, the Japanese government ordered the U.S. forces to stand down, asserting that the Japan Self-Defense Forces would take over rescue operations. On the night of August 12th, Japanese self-defense troops arrived at the scene, but a fatal mistake occurred. Witnessing the plane shattered into pieces, they assumed no one could have survived. The search was halted that very night. 14 hours after the disaster, rescue teams returned to the site and were stunned to find survivors. For passengers seated in the last row, had miraculously escaped death by a hair's breadth. Yumi Okiai, an off-duty Japan Airlines flight attendant traveling as a passenger, recounted that after the crash, many people still showed signs of life. They cried out for help in agony, but the freezing cold of the high-altitude night snuffed out their chances of survival. If the rescue team had arrived sooner, perhaps the death toll wouldn't have been so devastating, she said, choking back tears. The scene was a nightmare. Bodies lay scattered, wreckage and belongings strewn across a vast area. In total, 520 souls were lost forever. So what was the true cause behind the tragedy of this Boeing 747, a machine once hailed as the safest of its time? Initially, Japan's refusal of U.S. military assistance at the crash site sparked suspicions of political tensions between the two nations. Some speculated about terrorism, but no concrete evidence emerged. Given the gravity of the incident, both Japan and the U.S. swiftly launched investigations, determined to unravel the mystery of this doomed flight. The investigation into the JL 123 disaster was conducted jointly by Boeing and Japan Airlines soon after, but early leads seemed to hit dead ends. That is, until a photograph of the plane during its fateful flight surfaced, leaving investigators in disbelief. The tail of the Boeing 747 showed clear signs of abnormality. This was likely the direct cause of the catastrophe. They immediately traced the aircraft's history, and the truth began to emerge. On June 2, 1978, during Japan Airlines Flight 115, this very Boeing 747 had suffered a serious incident while landing at Osaka International Airport. The pilot had brought the plane down at too steep an angle, causing the tail to strike the runway forcefully. Although none of the 394 passengers were injured, The rear pressure bulkhead of the aircraft had cracked and sustained significant damage. Boeing subsequently carried out repairs, and the aircraft was returned to service. However, the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, uncovered a fatal flaw in the repair process. According to guidelines, the damaged bulkhead should have been reinforced with 2 rows of rivets to ensure structural integrity. Instead, Boeing technicians used only a single row of rivets, doubling the stress on them beyond standard limits and reducing the connecting steel plate's strength by 70%. Over thousands of flights across several years, the crack silently widened until that fateful day, August 12, 1985. The explosion in the tail destroyed the hydraulic system, the lifeblood of the aircraft, leading to a complete loss of control. As a result, 520 lives aboard JAL 123 paid the price for an almost unbelievable error by experts from one of America's leading aviation companies. The incident sent shockwaves around the world. The president of Japan Airlines resigned to take responsibility, while the head of Boeing's maintenance division took his own life shortly afterward. The Japan Self-Defense Forces quickly adapted, equipping themselves with helicopters specialized for nighttime and mountainous rescue operations. Boeing was compelled to overhaul its maintenance procedure manuals, vowing never to repeat such a mistake. It was a costly lesson, written in blood and tears, not only for airlines, but for the entire global aircraft manufacturing industry. Though the cause was eventually clarified, the wounds left by the tragedy remain an indelible haunting memory for those left behind. Amid the wreckage, a heart-wrenching handwritten letter from a husband to his wife and children was discovered and later shared with the public. The man was Masakatsu Taniguchi. His letter read, "My dearest Kyoko, be good, work hard, and help your mother. I'm so sorry to end up in this situation. I don't think I'll make it. There was a loud explosion, smoke filled the cabin, and the plane is falling. I don't know what's happening. Goodbye. Take good care of the kids. It's 6:30 now. The plane is out of control and dropping fast. I've had a fulfilling life, and I'm grateful for that." Those choked words were not just a farewell from a father and husband, but an echoing cry of sorrow from the 520 souls lost forever on that doomed flight.